because this evening is about kids and music, I just have to do this next song. It's just a requirement.
Whitney Houston. The truth her family hated most. On February 11th, 2012, the most powerful voice the world had ever heard went silent in a bathtub on the 4th floor of the Beverly Hilton Hotel. She was 48 years old. The official cause of death: accidental drowning, with heart disease and cocaine use listed as contributing factors. But that's the medical answer. The real answer, the one her family fought for years to suppress, deflect, and reframe, is far more complicated and far more human. To understand the truth, you have to first understand the myth. Whitney Houston was not just a singer. She was a project, a carefully constructed image, built from childhood, polished to a blinding shine, and protected, fiercely, by the people closest to her. Born in Newark, New Jersey in 1963, Whitney grew up in the church. Her mother, Cissy Houston, was a Grammy-winning gospel singer. Her godmother was Aretha Franklin. Her cousin was Dionne Warwick. She came from royalty, and everyone around her knew it. By 17, she was signed. By 22, her debut album had sold over 25 million copies worldwide. By 30, she was the highest-paid black entertainer on the planet. But here's what the family's carefully managed press narrative never wanted you to sit with too long. Whitney Houston had been telling people she was struggling since the early 1980s. Not with fame, not with the industry, with the people she loved most.
I have a book review / a discussion on the Robert Crawford and Whitney Houston story that I was very touched by.
In 2019, Robin Crawford, Whitney's best friend since age 16, published a memoir called A Song for You: My Life with Whitney Houston. In it, she confirmed what years of rumors had circled, that she and Whitney had been romantically involved as teenagers. Crawford wrote that Whitney eventually ended that part of their relationship, not because her feelings changed, but because she was afraid. Afraid of what her mother would say. Afraid of what her church would say. Afraid of what it would do to the image that was already being built around her. Cissy Houston, a woman of deep Baptist faith, had made her feelings about her daughter's sexuality known, not always in public statements, but in ways that Whitney felt every single day. In her own memoir, Remembering Whitney, published just months after her daughter's death.
Do you believe that Whitney and Robin were in a gay relationship?
I don't really know. I thought, I didn't particularly like her.
What didn't you like?
Cissy acknowledged the friendship with Robin Crawford. She called it too close. She said she believed Whitney was not gay. She said she believed Whitney made the right choice. What she did not acknowledge, what the family narrative has consistently refused to center, is the cost of that choice. The cost of a young woman being told, by the people whose love she needed most, that a fundamental part of herself was something to be hidden. Psychologists who have studied the trauma of identity suppression are direct about what that does to a person over decades. It doesn't stay contained. It bleeds out into self-medication, into volatile relationships, into a desperate, lifelong search for something that feels like unconditional love. When Whitney Houston's life began to visibly unravel in the late 1990s, the world needed a villain. Bobby Brown was perfect. He was loud. He had a criminal record. He was everything Whitney's handlers had spent years insisting she wasn't. And so the story was set. Bobby Brown destroyed Whitney Houston. Her family leaned into it. The press ran with it. And for years, it was accepted as fact. But people who worked closely with Whitney, producers, backup singers, security, have told a different story. Yes, Bobby Brown had serious problems. Yes, their marriage was turbulent. There were documented incidents of domestic violence that should never be minimized. But Whitney Houston had been using drugs before Bobby Brown. Former associates have stated in interviews that cocaine was present in Whitney's world as early as the mid to late 1980s, when her career was at its absolute peak, and Bobby Brown was barely a footnote in her life. The addiction didn't arrive with Bobby. Bobby arrived into an addiction that was already taking root. The Bobby did it narrative was not just inaccurate, it was useful. It gave the family a clean story, it gave the public a clean villain, and it let everyone around Whitney avoid the harder question. What were we doing, or not doing, while she was hurting? Bobby Brown himself said in the years after her death, "I loved Whitney. I was not her drug dealer. She had her own habits before we met." His critics called that self-serving. Maybe, but it also happened to be corroborated. Here's a dimension of Whitney's story that gets the least airtime because it implicates the most people. Whitney Houston, at her peak, was not just a human being. She was an industry. She generated hundreds of millions of dollars for Arista Records, for Sony Music, for film studios, for promoters, for managers, for her own family business interests. And here's the uncomfortable truth about industries. They don't stop running because a cog is struggling. They find ways to keep the machine moving. There are documented accounts from journalists, from former insiders, from Whitney herself in interviews, of label pressure to perform, to record, to tour, even during periods when anyone paying attention could see she was not well. In a 1996 interview, Whitney said, on camera, "I am my own worst critic." But she also said something else that got far less attention. People want to own you. She wasn't speaking abstractly. Various documentaries and biopics have touched on this dynamic. But even those projects, many of which had varying levels of family cooperation, stayed carefully inside certain lines. They showed the addiction. They did not fully interrogate who benefited from keeping Whitney in the machine, even as she was falling apart. That's the conversation her estate, her family, and the music industry have never been willing to sit down and have honestly. If there is a moment that strips away every myth and forces us to look clearly at the real cost of these patterns, it is this. On January 31st, 2015, just 3 years after Whitney Houston was found unresponsive in a bathtub, Whitney's daughter, Bobby Christina Brown, was found unresponsive in a bathtub. She was 21 years old. She died 6 months later, in July 2015. The parallels are not coincidence, they are consequence. Bobby Christina grew up watching her mother's pain be managed, denied, rebranded, and explained away. She grew up in a house where the truth was never the most important thing. The most important thing was the story. She grew up without learning the language for what she was actually experiencing, and when her own darkness came for her, she had no tools, no model, no honest family history to learn from, because that history had been protected from her. This is the truth Whitney Houston's family hated most, not any single fact, but the pattern of silence, the pattern of image over honesty, the pattern of managing instead of healing. Whitney Houston did not die because she was weak. She did not die because of one man, or one drug, or one bad decision. She died in the wreckage of a lifetime of being told that what she actually felt was less important than what looked right. Whitney Houston left us something extraordinary. Hundreds of recordings. A voice that still, when you hear it cold, stops you in place. But she also left us something harder. A story that, if we're willing to read it honestly, tells us a great deal about what we ask of the people we place on pedestals. We ask them to be perfect. We ask them to be grateful. We ask them to perform their joy so convincingly that we never have to worry about their pain. And when they break, we look for a villain. We write a memoir. We cooperate with a documentary just enough to shape the narrative. We protect the legacy. We do not, very often, just tell the truth. Whitney Houston deserved better than the story she was handed. Her daughter deserved better. And we, if we actually love the music the way we say we do, owe them both more than the comfortable version. She told us she would always love us. The least we can do is finally love her back honestly. If this story hit different for you, drop a comment below. I read them. If you're new here, subscribe. We go deep on the stories behind the stories. And if you want to go even further on Whitney, her 1996 Diane Sawyer interview is still one of the most revealing pieces of media she ever did. Link in the description. See you in the next one.